What happened there?
Not sure, Brian. Everything just kicked us out of the meeting, but we're back.
Yep.
We're coming back in.
Weird. All right. We're good.
Katie's trying to get back in. Says its host has another meeting in session.
Here she comes.
Okay.
Apologies to anyone who may have just gotten kicked out. Thank you to our attendees.
Hey, Brian, I'm unable to share the screen. It says host disabled screen sharing.
Rob, can you handle that? Thank you. Thanks everyone for logging back on. Sorry about that. Everyone got kicked out, including the presenters this morning. It wouldn't be a Zoom meeting if we didn't have a few technical glitches along the way. There we go. I can see your presentation, Catherine.
Okay, great.
As people log back on, I'll give everyone just another minute or so. So please just sit back and we'll get started very shortly. Great. All right, it looks like the attendees have slowed down and everyone seems to be back in. So great, welcome. Good morning, everyone. My name is Brian Slack and I'm Principal Transportation Planner for the Ulster County Transportation Council. Thank you for joining us this morning for our webinar as we present the findings of the Kingston Railroad Crossing Study. Today we're joined by Ulster County Planning Department staff, Robert Leibowitz, he's our Principal Land Use Planner, and we'll also be joined shortly by our Director, Dennis Doyle, for today's presentation. And we're also joined here this morning with our project consultants from WSP. I'd like our consultants to please take a moment to introduce yourselves, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, good morning. My name is Katie Craig from WSP. I am the project manager of this study.
Good morning. My name is Jim Fox. I'm also from WSP. I'm a rail safety subject matter expert for the study, 34 years in the industry.
Scott Legacy, WSP, out of the Troy office.
And I see that Dennis is with us as well. Great, thank you all. Dennis, would you mind introducing yourself?
Hi, Dennis Doyle, Planning Director for the county, also the Director of the Ulster County Transportation Council. Welcome, everyone.
Great, thank you. So before we begin our presentation, I'd like to go over some basic housekeeping for today's meeting. Just a few guidelines that'll help us navigate the system efficiently as we go through the slides. I'd like to note that the meeting is being recorded and will be posted on the Participate Ulster webpage shortly after its completion, along with a project transcript. We ask that attendees remain muted and off camera for the length of the meeting, and to please hold questions until the end of the meeting, at which point we'll open the floor for questions and comment, and you can unmute yourself. And at that time, Robert will we'll ask folks to raise your hand, and we'll allow folks to speak by stating their name and open up the audio for your question or comment. And you can also use the Q&A function if you're more comfortable with that on Zoom. And we'll also provide contact information at the end of the meeting. So if you'd like to provide written comments directly to the project team, you're certainly welcome to do that as well. And the comment period will be open through the end of the calendar year. Those are the housekeeping rules. So let's begin. The Kingston Railroad Safety Study was initiated by Ulster County Transportation Council in early 2023 in direct partnership with the City of Kingston. The project was initiated partly in response to a number of serious injury and fatal incidents that had happened on the railroad right-of-way within the city of Kingston. And UCTC, it should be noted, had completed a number of studies for on the railroad right-of-way going back to the early 2000s. But we had agreed that now would probably be a good time to update the findings of those studies and re-examine the study area to determine what exactly was occurring here that may be causing some of these crashes. The focus of our efforts is on the CSX-owned right-of-way within the city of Kingston. This is traditionally known as the West Shore Railroad, and it deals with 6 surface-grade crossings: Flatbush, Cemetery Ave, Gage Street, Foxhall Avenue, Tenbrook, and Smith Avenue crossings. At this point, I think we can go to the next slide. You'll be able to see an overview of our study area. And I'd like to give the floor over to our project consultants at WSP.
All right, thanks, Brian.
Mhm.
So as Brian just had said, our focus really was on these rail crossings that he just mentioned, the 6 at-grade rail crossings. And we're just going to go briefly over, there's a lot of new faces today, some of the existing conditions data that we have, and our mitigation, and ultimately our recommendations for this study. So I just wanted to play that video for you guys, and I am very loud, but I cannot compete with that train horn. But for our study objective, it really was to evaluate and enhance the safety along the regional West Shore Railroad corridor in the city of Kingston. And we did focus on assessing existing street crossings, crashing, and trespass incidents along this rail corridor. And really just to highlight that video, a lot of what we saw in our crash data dealt a lot with driver frustration due to having to wait at these grade crossings. And as you could see in this video, one of the vehicles just made a U-turn and decided to go elsewhere because they didn't want to wait. As part of our study, we also looked at and reviewed past studies that have been performed in the city of Kingston that included the 2006 Quiet Zone Study and Pedestrian and Safety Mobility Analysis, the 2008 Ulster County Integrated Advanced Train Detection Study and Implementation Plan, the Boise's Lane Rail Crossing Study, the recent Safe and Accessible Flatbush and Foxhall Study, as well as the 2045 Ulster County Comprehensive Plan. And next, if you haven't joined any of our previous public engagement meetings, we did prepare a study video that will go over some of the existing conditions that we developed as part of this study.
Everyone, my name is Steve Noble, and I'm the mayor here in the city of Kingston. The Ulster County Transportation Council is undertaking a rail crossing study to help evaluate and enhance safety along the CSX rail corridor here in the city of Kingston. We are so excited to be able to get the public's input on the existing conditions and movement of people and vehicles across and alongside our tracks. The public outreach meetings intend to bring constituents and key stakeholders together to help understand how people interact within the corridor. Your presence and expertise will be invaluable to this conversation.
The Ulster County Transportation Council is undertaking a rail crossing safety study to assess and improve safety along the regional West Shore Railroad corridor in the city of Kingston.
The study will focus on assessing existing street crossings, crashes, and trespass incidents along the rail corridor while considering the impact of surrounding land uses. Rail corridors in urban areas are common in the U.S. The CSX rail corridor runs through the middle of the city of Kingston and provides for some challenges for residents and visitors who cross from west to east or vice versa.
WSP, in association with SGB, was hired to review the rail corridor and evaluate specific areas of the corridor for ideas to improve the safety of crossing the rail corridor.
Review of preliminary data and site evaluation indicated that at least 3 areas stand out as focus areas. The first is alongside the tracks in between Flatbush Avenue and Cemetery Drive. The second is the at-grade crossing at Foxhall Avenue. And third, the area south of Broadway. The contributing factors in these 3 locations are very different. In consecutive field visits to the study area, trespassing was observed from the at-grade crossing with Cemetery Drive along the rail corridor to the at-grade crossing with Flatbush Avenue. There are known origins and destinations to the northwest of St. Mary's Cemetery that make this a desirable shortcut. As observed in the field, there is visible worn pedestrian paths located here. The at-grade crossing at Foxhall Avenue is angled with 3 other streets feeding into the crossing. The configuration is confusing for vehicles, and pedestrians seem to cut the angle and cross the rail tracks away from the marked crossings. South of Broadway, there isn't a crossing, but high schoolers and others trespass along the rail line from neighborhoods west of the rail line to access the Kingston High School and YMCA, located east of the rail line. These pedestrians could use the protected grade-separated crossing at Broadway, but that would add several minutes to their journey. Some fencing was erected to manage this trespass activity, but the fence was quickly damaged to allow the activity to resume. As our study continues, additional areas will be evaluated and recommendations to improve safety will be provided to Ulster County Transportation Council. We strive to get input from the community to inform the study so that the recommendations provide effective and reasonable solutions to improve community safety along the rail corridor.
So thank you for lending your time, your energy, and your commitment to being able to make sure that our corridor is as safe as possible. Hi everyone, my name is
All right, thanks for sticking with us and listening to that video. To supplement that video, we're kind of just going to go over a little bit of a high-level existing conditions of our at-grade crashes and trespasses that we had for this study. So as you'll read in the report, or if some of you have already reviewed the report, the crash data for this study area considered a 6-year time frame of the most recent data available from New York State DOT's CLEAR system. 70 crashes occurred during this time frame that were at or near the highway rail grade crossings in our study area. The highest number of these total crashes occurred at Foxhall Avenue. There were 48 crashes, which accounted for 69% of the total crashes. Of these total crashes, 25% accounted for injury crashes, with 12 injuries occurring at Foxhall Avenue and 4 occurring at Flatbush Avenue. There was 1 fatality during this time period at Smith Avenue, and this is when a driver disregarded the rail crossing gates that had come down, and they drove around, and subsequently they were hit by the train. There were 2 passengers in the vehicle, and 1 did not survive. We did also have 8 crashes that involved a vehicle and a train. 5 of these 8 total collisions occurred at Foxhall Avenue grade crossing. And just a quick summary is that, with these vehicle train collisions, what we really saw in the data was a lot of the drivers going around the gates that were already down, or they happened to be in the middle of the crossing, possibly stopped in a little bit of congestion, and the gates went down when they were in, that dynamic envelope. So a lot of these crashes with the vehicles and the trains were due to driver frustration and not wanting to wait for the gates. And next, I'm going to pass it off to Jim, our rail safety expert, to kind of talk about the trespassing incidences that we saw from our FRA data.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. So the data we obtained from the trespassing incidents along this section of the corridor came from FRA data as reported by CSX. They're required to report trespass incidents and crash incidents under the FRA requirements. And so we pulled that data, and over a 10-year study, we identified that there were 14 trespass incidents, 10 of which involved fatality, and the other 4 involved injury. When you look at the locations, this heat map here kind of spreads out where the majority of those trespass incidents are. There's no real big pattern other than what was mentioned in the mayor's video. We did see a couple common areas where trespassing is more prevalent. That section between Flatbush and Cemetery, by the cemetery itself, and then down by Broadway and Greenkill, where people are crossing from west to east to go over to the Y or the high school area. So when we look at the data for both the crashes, and you could go to the next slide, please. And then one more. So when we look at the data for both crashes and trespasser incidents, one of the things we try to look at is we evaluate this through a risk analysis and a vulnerability analysis. Risk and hazard assessment models focus on safety-related acts, and vulnerability assessment models focus on the security-related or intentional acts. And trespassing as an illegal act of walking on the private property of the railroad is an intentional act. So we put it through a vulnerability assessment model. And then the other incidents that are not intentional, we look at that through a safety risk assessment model. The safety risk assessment model utilizes a modified version of the MIL standard 882 approach for methodology. And the vulnerability assessment model utilizes the American Public Transportation Association security risk assessment methodology through the APTA standard process. So taking the data and we work that through the models, we come up with risk ratings and risk scores to try to prioritize and focus where our highest likelihood of events are. And then we work on developing mitigations for each of those types of events. So if you wanted to transfer to the next slide, we'll go into some of the mitigations that we evaluated. When looking at mitigations for the grade crossing environments, we typically focus on a 3E principle: engineering solutions, educational solutions, and enforcement solutions. So looking at a couple of the engineering solutions that we considered for improvements along this section of the corridor, advanced warning signs and markings. Some of the locations in the current area could see some improvements with additional markings or adding new pavement markings or restriping the existing pavement markings to make them more visible. Active gates and flashers. Now, while most of the locations do have active gates and flashers, there could be some areas for improvements, particularly in that Foxhall area for improving the grade crossing active warning devices. Because, as we mentioned, the situation where a lot of people become impatient or try to go around the gates, looking at things like 4-quadrant gates or center lane delineators and barriers that could prevent traffic from navigating around the gates and trying to hold them into their current holding pattern while the gates are active and the train is in the approach of the grade crossing. We also considered, because of such a high incident rate at Foxhall, looking at reconfiguring that intersection and making it more user-friendly and a little bit safer for the drivers as they navigate through that unique configuration. One of the other things when we looked at the grade crossing environments from an engineering solution is oftentimes the pedestrians walking across the crossing are competing with traffic of the motor vehicles, and trying to create dedicated pathways and sidewalks for the pedestrians to cross the crossing and keeping the traffic lanes open for just motor vehicles would be another improvement in engineering solution we've identified. And there's always an option for consolidation and closure, so that while that was considered and evaluated in this case, one of the unique things to this section of the county and the city of Kingston is that by closing or consolidating an existing crossing, you typically will migrate traffic to an adjacent crossing. And since there are a lot of adjacent crossings next to each other in this section that we studied, we think that by consolidating one area might create additional traffic congestion and volume in another area and only worsen the situation in the other areas. So we did consider it, but it's not something that we are recommending at this time as part of the report. Okay, Katie, you can move on to the education and enforcements. So the other parts of the 3 E's is the education. So this would involve working with the community and providing some educational information sharing, on-site safety events, and just reminding the commuters in the area about some of the risks associated with navigating through grade crossings and some of the actual situations that are being experienced in the Kingston, Ulster County area. Also partnering with Operation Lifesaver. Operation Lifesaver is a national program that provides a lot of literature and educational information for the communities, and it can be tailored to a variety of ages, from school-age children to get them educated at a young age about some of the dangers and risks of not only grade crossing safety, but also trespassing on tracks. And this can also be tailored up to driver's ed classes for younger adults, older adults, and even seniors. So Operation Lifesaver's done a nice job over the years to allow the railroads and the communities to partner with them and be a resource for additional educational solutions. As far as enforcement, this is where typically law enforcement comes in to help and ensure people that are willfully and illegally acting at grade crossings or trespassing along railroad rights of way are enforced, and whether that be through actual police presence in the ground or taking advantage of video technology and newer analytics through artificial intelligence, where you can identify hotspots or patterns of trespassing or illegal activity at grade crossings. Some enforcement solutions were also included in the report. One thing we wanted to also highlight is that we did factor in quiet zones and the quiet zone study that was implemented back in 2006. And, just to give you some background on what quiet zones are, this is where it would enable the community to put certain mitigations and treatments in place so that the train horn would not have to be activated at every grade crossing. Now, because that is a safety feature to activate the train horn, there is a substantial amount of additional treatments and mitigations that have to be put in place if you're going to get authorization from the FRA to meet a quiet zone consideration. This is something that the railroad does not initiate. This is something that's initiated by the public authority or the local municipality. And in order to be classified as a quiet zone by the FRA, you have to meet a series of a couple conditions. And it's basically looking at some data and putting into a risk score and comparing the risk at the individual crossing that's being considered against national averages. If you are lower than that, that makes you more favorable to be granted a quiet zone. And then the other thing that's a very simple approach is just committing to the FRA that you are going to implement additional safety measures for that location. And those things are things like those 4 quadrant gates, mediums in the middle of the center line, delineators, channelization devices, or closing the grade crossing. So while this is still something that's being considered and thought through by the community, when we implemented our recommendations and mitigation strategies for this report, we did factor in improvements that will already align and only help in the future if the community wanted to pursue quiet zone operation. Okay, next slide. So when we looked at the trespassing situations and some of the mitigations that we have identified for there, again, we work around the 3 E's, and engineering solutions for trespassing environments are fencing, and more importantly, more security-based fencing. Now, while it's not ideal or financially possible to possibly fence in the entire right-of-way, looking at some of those hotspot areas at Cemetery and near Broadway would be an ideal location to put additional fencing in there, and maybe enhancing the fencing to security rating, which is a lot tougher to compromise and cut by the general public. So it stays intact a lot more, and it does its job of providing that positive barrier between the the pedestrian and the rail right of way. Additional signage to remind individuals about the privacy and the private property of the rail right of way, and that it is illegal to trespass. And in addition to that, you could also incorporate suicide prevention and some mental health hotlines that are available for suicide individuals that might be contemplating suicide, and adding some signage along the right of way there. So they were additional recommendations. While fencing's an easy and ideal barrier, we also recognize it doesn't always look as good. And even though there's decorative fencing, there's additional solutions that can be as effective, like natural barriers and plants and vegetation that could also create a barrier between the public corridors and the rail rights of way. So we've identified them in this study as well. Pedestrian overpass and underpasses are an ideal way to separate the rail right of way and give the public and the motor vehicles an ideal traffic pattern so that they can navigate around the right of way without having to come into contact with the tracks itself. And we did look at that in one area by Broadway, and looking to possibly incorporate some additional stairs to get up and down into the Broadway area and over the tracks from Greenkill. And so let's go into the education solutions and enforcement solutions are very similar to what we have identified in the grade crossing environments. So additional community information, educational campaigns, awareness, safety events, and blitzes to educate the public, also tapping into Operation Lifesaver. And then also from the enforcement standpoint, for trespassing environments, if you know of concentrated areas, you can add cameras and intrusion detection systems that can monitor and activate when individuals are walking through hot traffic areas or areas where common people are using it as footpaths to get across the right of way. And so we've identified those as potential solutions too from the enforcement standpoint. Okay, the recommendations, and Katie, I guess we'll tag team on this. So a couple of things, a picture's worth 1,000 words. A couple of things we suggested in the recommendations to summarize without going into detail line by line. In the area of Greenkill and Broadway, since this is a heavy area that people do tend to cross over to get to that Y in the high school area, and we've seen some fencing that was cut in this area. Recommendations to enhance pedestrian pavement crosswalks and give them a clear channel and flow away from the right of way so they know how to get across into the other side of the community rather than have to go across the tracks. And complement that with security fencing along that section of the Greenkill Avenue area, as you can see here depicted in these graphic renderings. One of the other solutions as depicted here in the Ten Brock area is to enhance and improve that pedestrian sidewalk environment, keeping a dedicated path for pedestrians away from the car traffic, enhancing the grade crossing area by putting dynamic envelope striping in and additional pavement markings. This is a visual cue to the riders, especially if there is congestion in the area and riders tend to kind of stop on the tracks and back up if traffic in front of them stops. This will be a reminder of the area you do not want to stop on. If you're in that dynamic envelope, you have a likely chance of getting struck by a train if you can't clear the gates in time, if traffic doesn't clear itself. So adding that pavement markings there. And then you could see in the center lanes there by the yellow lines, we've added delineators, the channelization there to help remind people that it's not going to be as easy to cross over and avoid the gates and stay in their channel lane there and wait for the train to cross. And then just enhancing pavement markings and striping in some areas, they could be reintroduced into the grade crossing environment. So this is just a sample rendering of what some of the suggested improvements could look like if those enhancements are carried out at a grade crossing like Ten Brock.
Yeah.
Next slide. Okay, did you have something else?
Nope. So,
okay.
you know, the rest of the renderings and recommendations can be found in the project report that Brian has posted to the project website on Participate Ulster. And you can send any additional question and comments you have to uctc@co.ulster.ny.us. So at this point, I think we're going to open it up to Q&A.
Yep.
So
Thank you,
just
Jim.
raise your
Thank you,
hand if
Katie.
you have a question.
We
All
have
right.
some questions coming up.
All right, Mr. Brazier, you can introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Paul Brazier, and I lived on Cornell Street above my business for 20 years now. I own a business at Cornell and Smith. And can you see me okay?
Can't see you, but we can hear you loud and clear.
Yeah,
Okay.
there's no video in for.
All right. I've lived on the corner of Cornell and Smith for 20 years above my business. I'm basically calling in regards to pictures that and renderings myself and several other business owners have seen that are showing that you may close off Cornell Street. And we find this absolutely insane because number one, Cornell Street is a main thoroughfare through the Midtown area of Kingston, and it's a wide open thoroughfare. And I spoke to the city engineer from Kingston, and he said that if Cornell was closed off, that they would route traffic up O'Neill Street, which is really a residential street, whereas Cornell Street is not. I'm pretty much the only person in my address is Smith Avenue that lives there, and there's a house next door to me on Cornell, and of course the people that live in the shirt factory and lace mill. But I've interacted with the intersection of Foxhall and Cornell for the last 20 years. And I've actually sat down there since I found out about this project for several hours at a time and watched traffic and see what was going on. And as far as routing traffic up O'Neill Street, if you close down Cornell, it would be a major disaster because
Paul, we lost your audio there for a moment.
Can you hear me now? Hello?
Very faint,
Very
very
low.
faint.
Yeah.
How I would turn.
There, you're back. There you
Okay.
go.
You can hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, so as far as like routing traffic up O'Neill Street, which is a very
And we lost you again, Paul.
let me just see.
I don't know what's going on there.
Can you hear me now?
So if you want to try it again, Paul?
Yes, I do. Because I have
Yeah, we can hear you just very, very faintly. It's hard to discern, but we did hear the first part of your question. And let me try to address it. And then if you have anything else, maybe if you could use the Q&A function and we can do follow-ups if necessary, if I don't address it adequately. But the railroad crossing study started in 2023. And it essentially assumes that the city of Kingston will implement changes to their roadway system following the federal aid process and projects that they're already engaged in. So we're following the lead of the city of Kingston in that regard with the Foxhall and Flatbush Avenue projects. So I would encourage you to continue to provide that input to the city of Kingston. They're still in the design process, but they're rapidly coming to a close of that design process for the Foxhall and Flatbush project. They're not anticipating construction until 2026 at this point. That is a draft estimate for construction. And I believe there's still a budget shortfall on that project, but they're working toward sealing that up. So we have incorporated the city's findings, but please provide us your written comments with regard to detours and the experiences that local residents are having and how they interact with that intersection, and we'll include that as part of this project. If I didn't summarize that sufficiently, please continue and add additional thoughts in the Q&A, Paul.
All right, I got Ms. Bailey. You're unmuted.
Hi, actually, this is Jim Bailey, and Ann is sitting to my side. We are Bailey Pottery Equipment. We have two buildings in this hub. We have one at the Foxhall Crossing, 219 Foxhall, and we have a building right on the crossing on Tenbrook. And I have a lot of concerns with this report because I'm not hearing anything that has been a study so far about the commercial businesses and the trucks that need to get in and out to our facilities, because they have to traverse neighborhoods and routes to our locations. We have 40 employees. We've been in Kingston for over 45 years running our business. And once you start blocking off one area, just like water flow, it's going to go to another area. There can be all sorts of issues from concentrations at other crossings and such. So I'm very concerned right off the top that you're talking about pedestrians and safety. I'm all about that. I just want to say, looking at that initial barrier of wire that was easily bypassed, it's no surprise someone just bent it out of the way and cut through. And I think going to security fencing is the only way you're going to deviate people for that area. But you know, there's how long are you going to run that people can get in where it stops. But indeed, the security fencing makes sense. Now, I'm going to go back to Foxhall. You know, it's got a lot of streets converging there, but it's a delicate balance. And which way trucks need to come in from the throughway and get to locations of businesses like Paul was discussing. And I'm sorry, Paul, you couldn't continue with your sound because I was really wanting to hear what you had to say in this meeting. And if he can come back and finish, I'd like that instead of the Q&A, because I'd like to hear it real time now, if possible. The other thing is, what is the speed of the trains? You know, sometimes trains are really hauling ass through this corridor with oil and such. And that's always been a concern here in Kingston. And, you know, so we're talking about security of pedestrians, but for the whole community. And, you know, it still would be a lot safer, just like with automobiles. We know that if you lower the speed, it becomes safer, and it's no different with trains. The faster you go, derailment, look what's happened in the United States with toxic chemicals pouring out. And I'm also concerned, not just in how we change the flow is the outcome, because if this is going to be a way that CSX can now go through at higher speeds, that's another concern for the community. And so these are some of the things that we wanted to express. And I'm going to go now to, just for a moment more, on Tinbrook. Sure. Trucks, we might have 20 trucks come into our driveway.
Tractor trailers.
And it's the only way into our building. And I'm talking tractor trailers up to 42 feet long on the trailer. And they have that, they can do it, but they got to be on target. And they swing in, coming in from Cornell, and make a left into that driveway. And then there's the crossing. So there's no room to spare. And sometimes some of the shorter trucks have to come in from the reverse direction. You can't put a partition in the street or they're not going to be able to negotiate things. So you need input from businesses as to what these things will do to our commerce and how you can't put us out of business because trucks can't get to us. And you can't make it more difficult than it already is. And this has been a manufacturing sector in Kingston since the late 1800s. And trains, I don't know, were coming through so fast. Then we had pedestrian trains coming through at that time, passenger travel. And of course, that station was removed. Passenger went to the other side of the Hudson, and now we have the trains concentrated going through here. So things change. But, you know, what was the speed of trains back then? 1910, 20, 30, 40, 50. You know, and are we seeing an increase in the speed? Because you're about safety, and higher speed with dangerous cargoes is more dangerous. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. No, that was a lot. There were some really good points here, and I can begin to address a couple of them, and then I'm going to want Jim to maybe clarify, Jim and Katie to clarify on a few others. But first is regarding trucks and the closure. And again, I want to differentiate between the city's federal aid project to look at Foxhall and Flatbush Avenue They are undertaking that project. Those designs are subject to review and approval by the New York State DOT regarding any changes to the roadway. And they are examining, as we all know, potential closure of Cornell, the intersection of Cornell with Foxhall. Of note is that as you very aptly pointed out, that is a truck route identified by the New York State DOT for truck maneuvers. So if that were to be closed, it would have to be delisted by and approved by the New York State Department of Transportation. I believe that's a relatively high bar, but again, I want to emphasize that is at the discretion of the city of Kingston to move forward or not with that design. And it would be subject to approval by the New York State DOT because it is a designated truck route. Cornell Street is a designated truck route at this point in time. And I believe there's a manual that addresses that specific topic of truck routes published by New York State DOT. I want to address the other issue of closures because Jim, you did address that issue in the presentation. I wonder if maybe you could review that line of thought that we included in the report regarding potential closures of crossings.
Yeah, sure. So that is obviously a solution that's in consideration in the toolbox of things that you can implement to try to help improve safety. But in the situation, and you have to look at it, and Mr. Bailey, you're exactly right. You factor in what is going on around the community and see by fixing one problem, you might create two other problems. And that's one of the things that we looked at here because of the close proximity from all the crossings along this section of the corridor. By trying to look at ways to eliminate, the only crossing that we considered that could be of one to eliminate would be the Cemetery Lane crossing, but that is a privately owned crossing. It's not a municipality or a county-owned crossing, and there's been discussion between the cemetery and CSX. All the other ones, we believe, by closing those crossings, you're only creating issues in other locations by funneling additional traffic, additional congestion, and while it might address the problem at one, you're not really adding a value to the overall risk in the whole entire corridor. So we did not recommend that in this case. There was a previous study that recommended the closure. I think it was the Smith Street, but we would not recommend that based on what we're seeing as the density and congestion and the close proximity from the different crossings in the rail corridor. So, and then to your point about the speeds of freight trains, just this is an issue that obviously CSX can weigh in more on, but the speed of the freight service in that area, it runs roughly between 35, 40 miles an hour. And there's a balance. So obviously they can only allow the trains to go at speed based on the condition of the rail. So the rail has to meet certain criteria under Federal Railroad Administration based on how it's built, the alignment, the configuration, and how frequently it's inspected. And if it's classified at a certain level, it allows the train speed to be increased across that corridor. And in this case, they have roughly a 40, 45 mile an hour speed, maximum authorized speed in that corridor. And there's something to consider when you talk about slowing train speed down. As we identified early on in the presentation, there's an impatience level from the drivers sometimes. A 300, 400 car length locomotive freight train that comes through a corridor could take several minutes to clear a grade crossing. The slower it goes, it's going to increase that time frame to clear that grade crossing and create additional impatience from the drivers and the community and create more congestion and bottleneck the traffic situation in the area. So you're trying to come up with that happy balance. What is a speed that's conducive to safely allow the train to get through the crossing in as short a period of time so you're not creating all kinds of car traffic and congestion in the community, but at the same time, it's a speed that's safe enough. And that's also, like I said, contingent on the track conditions and the classification of that track that CSX implements with the FRA.
Thank you, Jim. That was a good explanation of speed. So again, we we are deferring to the city of Kingston because they have the maintenance jurisdiction of their roadways, but they are also subject to New York State DOT approval of how they design any changes to those roadways under the Transportation Alternatives Grant, which is called the Accessible Flatbush and Foxhall Avenue Project. So I would continue to refer your question and comment regarding that potential closure to the City of Kingston Engineering Department. I hope that addresses some of those concerns that you have, Mr. and Mrs. Bailey.
Okay, you have two questions in the Q&A, and both Mr. Brazier and the Baileys have their hands raised again. Why don't you take the Q&A first?
Yeah, I'll take the first one from Lucy Kaufman. My perception is that many of the pedestrian deaths were as a result of people using the railroad corridor as a pedestrian route between Broadway and the mall area and the town of Ulster. Is any alternate pedestrian accommodation being proposed? That was outside of the course of our study area. It is the path of least resistance for individuals who are on foot traveling, trying to get out to the mall area. But unfortunately, for the purposes of this effort, it was outside the study area. But trying to decrease trespass would be one of the methods to try to inhibit individuals from using that section of the corridor. And I know that CSX staff are very vigilant as well in trying to prohibit individuals from trespassing on their property. The next question is from Robert Rohauer, who is a representative of CSX. Has any consideration been given to consolidate several existing at-grade crossings through the inclusion of a new grade separated crossing? I'm going to defer to our consultants, but I'd also invite Robert to perhaps expound a little bit on that comment if you are so inclined to do so.
You can.
So just to Jim and Katie, I don't believe we examined the possibility of creating a new crossing, at least not in this segment of the study area in the city of Kingston. That is a topic that I think has been explored in the town of Ulster, out near Route 209 in that general vicinity, but I don't believe it was examined in any great detail through this effort.
I think that's fair to say. It is, and to Robert's point, in addition to crossing elimination or consolidation, altering the existing crossings to a separated, grade separated underpass or overpass is also a mitigation strategy. Unique to the Ulster Kingston environment here, you have a relatively flat topography. You don't have a lot of opportunity with the density and congestion of residential and commercial businesses and a lot of the infrastructure around some of these crossings to be able to easily just look at identifying grade separation environments. There would have to be extensive civil studies being done to determine, can it feasibly be done with the elevational changes that are needed to go down below or over top of the crossing with all the additional obstacles that are in the way with buildings and commercial properties and adjacent streets and stuff like that. So looking at it initially, it does not look favorable as an option without getting way too expensive and almost cost prohibitive. But if there wasn't a consideration for that, there would need to be a lot more engineering analysis done to even see the feasibility if it can be done through some of the environments that those crossings exist in right now.
We should note, as shown on the screen right now, the one crossing that has, we continue to believe, the highest potential for closure is the Cemetery Street or Cemetery Ave crossing. This is because it's not necessarily a public right of way. It's not through traffic connecting a neighborhood. It's accessing the cemetery for visitors. At this point in time, the owner of the crossing has been engaged and they're not interested in closing the crossing. They want to continue to have that access for the visitors within the cemetery. So it's something that I think we will definitely leave on the table, and I would encourage the city of Kingston to continue to have that discussion for one potential closure. When you have access to the property on the west side, also you can create access on the east side, and then gate the area off. It may be beneficial from a safety perspective. I'm not seeing any. Okay, there is a question in the Q&A, particularly with the Cornell Street possible closure, but probably everywhere. Are we taking into account the change forced on routing of emergency vehicles? There is an ambulance company on Cornell, and of course, fire trucks also need to get through. It's a very good point. I've personally witnessed emergency vehicles stopped and waiting for trains to clear while they're in the process of responding to an emergency with their beacons employed. It's really an unsettling sight to see. But it's a good point to note that closure may also extend response time. At this point, I want to see Paul Brazier, if you may want to try to unmute again to see if your audio issues maybe have been resolved. I want to give you the opportunity to maybe restate.
Can you hear me?
I can, yes.
Okay. I just want Mr. Bailey to know that I think we have similar concerns and that I will be over to see you. I've spoken with several business owners, and I've actually come up with a design that could probably help everything with safety in the Cornell Foxhall area, and also address Mr. Bailey's concerns also. I guess I shouldn't even say it now, because basically you're telling us we have to deal with the city of Kingston. And I've been on the phone for several hours with the city engineer, and he seems, I've explained the situation to him. I've lived I've lived 500 feet from that crossing for 20 years. And I know what goes on there. And I know that the trucks that go through there, and trying to put them through a residential area, like I say, is dangerous as far as safety is concerned. So anyway, just so Mr. Bailey knows, I will be over to see you. I've spoken with several businesses along the Cornell corridor. And, I just want you to know that I think we have similar concerns, although yours are specific to your business and mine are specific to my business. And mine are also specific to the safety of the neighborhood, because, like I said, I've been on the phone with the city engineer, and I think maybe we could come together and form a small group and present all these questions to the city, because basically I feel this is just rescue money that the city received and is trying to spend, and I don't know why. I'm all for improvements in the neighborhood, and I think the city of Kingston did a great job, the mayor included. But I just think that the Cornell idea is just a really bad one. That's all.
Thank you for your comment, Mr. Brazier. We very much appreciate it. Lucy Kaufman has a follow-up. The need to expand the scope to include alternate pedestrian routes. Trying to exclude people without providing an alternative is a losing game. I understand that it's a real challenge when we consider trying to accommodate individuals safely, because at the end of the day, we're all humans. And I think if you look, at campuses, particularly at schools, but you can see it everywhere, there are these goat paths that we can see that go usually the shortest route to the destination that an individual wants to go. And in this instance, it happens to be a very hazardous one. I should mention that we will also, in the very near future, be examining the Albany Avenue corridor from the new Kingston roundabout all the way out to the town of Ulster. Albany and Ulster Avenues will be examined through a comprehensive corridor management plan. There is very limited pedestrian accommodation. That would be one of the other alternate paths that individuals could choose to use in order to get from the city of Kingston to the town of Ulster. And it may be the case that individuals aren't using that public right of way because of a lack of safe and accessible sidewalks or other accommodations on that road. But we look forward to initiating that study at some point in calendar year 2025. And so we'll examine at least the Albany Avenue corridor as and some possible opportunities for improvement on that corridor for pedestrian access.
Looks like the Baileys may have had a follow-up comment. I'll let them talk.
Sure. Bailey's, go ahead.
Okay, you can hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, well, thank you, everyone. This is a very, very complex situation. It's an ecosystem. This whole matrix of streets and residential and commercial. And it's evolved, obviously, in the history of Kingston being a light industrial city. And with everyone dense packed around where the facilities of manufacture were. But here we are now. And this ecosystem we go and change things to make one thing better. How are we really looking at how all redistribution and loads on new streets and new corners that have to be traversed by trucks and such, with the bicycle paths and everything else that are now added to the traffic lanes in major Broadway and Albany Avenue and wherever, that trucks now would be forced to get to commercial businesses. I just want to go on record as saying this is complex, and it's concerning to me that we haven't, the people of that are in the commercial areas that are bringing in the trucks, and a lot of them, no one is really coming to us for input to how that's going to impact and what we have to be thinking about, how the trucks would have to travel to get here again with it. So, okay, City of Kingston, here we are. But I would hate to see some change that takes place that you can't go back and fix, that redirects all these flows to other areas and creates new issues. And where did we really land? What did we really gain from all this? Because it's a delicate balance and we don't have lots of options here. So that's what I wanted to express once again. And thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey.
Brian, I think one thing I just wanted to add, just to, and obviously the Foxhole environment is a unique environment that is gaining all the attention, and that's part of the city's project. If you take that out of the equation, on our recommendations and our evaluation for the remaining crossings that are more traditional, I wanted to just emphasize that we're not by any means showing any changes that would impact some of the things that Mr. Bailey's talking about. We're actually looking to only improve them. So your lanes of traffic are not decreasing. We're not blocking areas. If you look at the rendering in the report where the delineators or channelization markers in, they stop short of that driveway by their facility there right at the crossing. So we recognize that there's pathways for trucking and traffic to still utilize the commercial businesses and even residential areas. And the sidewalks that we're proposing at these grade crossings will kind of infringe into the CSX right away so that we don't reduce the roadway width, allowing traffic to still be able to use those roads, but now give the pedestrians a unique pathway as well to separate them from a lot of the busy congestion and the traffic, especially trucking that has been presented here. So I just want to make sure we're clear, and maybe we weren't as clear, but aside from Foxhole, all these other areas are not really going to reduce or minimize any current conditions. We're only going to improve the path, the traffic flow and the pedestrian flow through those areas by creating dedicated channelization points.
Mr. Rohar has raised his hand, so I'm going to let him talk.
Yeah, Rob, are you able to? There you go.
I think so. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Thanks, Brian, and everyone involved in this project. I think this is an awesome first step in many that we've been involved with over the years, and certainly having everyone on board to recognize that, you know, there are some concerns there related to both vehicular and pedestrian traffic as it traverses our railroad, both legally and illegally. You know, is a good thing that we're having this conversation. My comment or question about grade separation. While I realize that, the footprint there is pretty restrictive, the corridor dissecting the community the way it does, and the number of intersecting streets at grade is also very challenging, and both the geometry of those crossings and the type of activity, the amount of vehicular and pedestrian traffic that use it every day. But I would hope that that doesn't limit us to not at least consider or look at, more globally as a corridor study, that there may be options or opportunities through various public programs to look at something that may help with, as was mentioned on numerous occasions, driver that they become what was the word that I like, that they were inconvenienced, or they were impatient, right? So if you have a way to get from one side to the other without having to traverse the at-grade crossing and be held by a train. I know the emergency response is always an issue for communities, and that the train is present and blocking a route for fire and police, etc. So a grade separation is always something to look at, and there are creative ways of doing that. We've had great success in other locations where it was thought to be beyond a reasonable option, and after some time and effort to look at that, there are some ways of doing it. So I just wanted to make sure that that's still part of the conversation going forward. And while some of these recommendations will certainly enhance the safety for the crossings and the folks that are using them on a regular basis, we all would agree that the safest crossing is no crossing. So it makes for better quality of life with the passing of the trains and not requiring the use of the horn. And also, it gives you unrestricted access from one side of the tracks to the other. So that's all I just wanted to add. And again, thank you very much for putting all this together and continuing the dialogue. We very much appreciate the community's input, and look forward to working with you and all of the other agencies as we hopefully try to implement some of this and make it a safer corridor for everyone that's using it.
Thank you, Robert, and thank you for your cooperation throughout the effort as well. With that, that concludes our presentation for today. I want to thank everyone for taking the time out of their day to step in and review the presentation and provide their comments. Again, we will be accepting comments through the end of the 2024 calendar year, and those can be sent to the uctc@co.ulster.ny.us webpage. And if you have other questions, you can go to Participate Ulster, click on the Kingston Railroad Crossing Study page, and you can provide your comment on that page directly, and those questions and comments can be seen by everyone, and I will be providing answers to those as they come in. We'll also be posting this recording on Participate Ulster, as well as the transcript of the entire discussion from today. With that, any other comments from our consultants or planning department? Great. Well, thank you. That concludes today's presentation. Again, thank you for your time. Have a wonderful, happy, and above all, safe holiday. Thanks, everyone.